So I'm going to be putting some handles on some mugs. There's no right or wrong way to make a handle. Well, there are some wrong ways to make handles, but I'm going to show you some ways that I make handles. There's a lot of ways to make handles and a lot of great handles out there, but there's a few things to consider when you're putting on handles. So I threw some mugs earlier today, basically very cylindrical mugs, and I'm going to show you a couple things that I do in order to prepare them for handles. So when you put on a handle, the first thing you want to make sure is that your mug or your whatever it is you're putting a handle on is not too dry. So you can see here that it's in the leather hard stage, or sometimes referred to as the cheese hard stage. So I can still like press my thumb into it, but it's pretty stiff. I could handle it without putting fingerprints on it or changing the shape of it. So the bottom here is still soft, and as you can tell here, the bottom was sliced off the wheel. So there's a couple things I could do. I could trim it, but because I wasn't intending to trim these and have a foot on them, I don't have enough clay to actually merit a foot, or to be able to carve a foot into there. So what I'm going to do here is what I like to do with mugs, and that's rolling foot. And so I'm going to take this mug, I'm going to place it on a flat surface, nice clean flat surface, and I'm going to take it in my hands and I'm going to roll it. And so I'm not grasping it hard, I'm letting it sort of move in my hand. So if you can see here, I'm sort of almost passing it from one hand to another, rolling it on the table. And what that's doing is it's sort of making a nice foot shape here. And then I'll just take my thumb and I'll smooth out any little ridge that might cause a scratch later on when it becomes hard. And sort of indent that so that make sure that it's not going to be high centered. And then that just makes a nice little foot so that it elevates it off the table and creates a shadow under there and makes it look really nice. Sometimes I'll kind of add a little bit of detail on there while it's still soft. So I have a few mugs here. All of the rims have been rolled. And I have my clay that I'm going to use for my handles, which I've actually wedged probably twice as much as I would if I were wedging clay just to throw on the wheel, because you want to make sure that your clay, the act of wedging actually adds plasticity to your clay, so it makes it more stretchy, more malleable. And with handles, one of the techniques that I'm going to be showing you here is I'm going to require that the clay is very stretchy and plastic. So I wedge it probably 200 times in getting ready for it to become handles. So I'm going to take this clay, and I'm going to kind of throw it down. So this act of throwing, basically you can see I'm sort of stretching it out. I'm not throwing it straight down, I'm sort of throwing it forward so the back hits, and then as it rolls it sort of stretches itself up. So it's kind of making this kind of a tongue shape. Okay, so now that's going to be the start of the handle that I'm going to pull. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here with my bucket, move that. And over my bucket I'm going to hold this, and I'm going to make sure my hand is really wet. I'm going to wet that so that my hand just slips right over it. I've never actually milked a cow before, but I would imagine that it's similar. And so as I'm coming down, I want to make sure, because my hand is not symmetrical. I'm grabbing it like this. I want to make sure that you'll notice that I'm turning this from side to side and sort of paying attention to the fact that this side is as close to this side as I can. I want to have some symmetry. And as I'm pulling here, you can see that the pressure on my hand is just gradually increasing as I get to the bottom, but I'm allowing my hand to slide right over the surface and not grab too much clay at once. So I'm just gradually stretching it out until I get the desired width and thickness. And you could sort of put in some detail. Okay, so now that I've got kind of the basic shape of my handle, I'll lay it down here. I'll take a knife. Some of this is going to be cut away, so I'm not worried about how long it is at this point. I'm just going to use a section of that. And if I'm making a bunch of handles, if I've made sort of a line of cups, I'll usually work in multiples of like 12 or 15 at a time. And because I find that's usually the number where by the time I get to number 15, that handle is a little bit too, is getting on the edge of being too dry to use. So if I make more than 15 at a time, then I'm just, so another thing you can do is sort of lean your handle on a surface here so that you already have that sort of curvature of the handle. The clay will sort of remember that. And you can just pull, probably get about 10 handles, 10 or 12 handles out of this chunk of clay. So things that I'm looking for is symmetry, and I really want to try not to have any sharp edges, because eventually this is going to be a coffee cup, something that will have sort of a high use. I don't want any kind of sharp edge that doesn't feel good on your hand when you're using it. Stretching that clay out. So if I didn't wedge this clay enough, there's no way I would be able to stretch this many handles out of it. Okay, so one other way to get a handle on a mug is to pull the handle from the mug. So when you look at a handle from a mug, sometimes the handle looks like it's kind of attached to the mug, and other times it looks like it's kind of growing out of the mug. And so if you want it to kind of look like it's growing out of the mug, sometimes it might be a good idea to pull it right off the mug. So in order to do that, I'm going to take my serrated rib, fork, something that you could rough up an edge, and I'm going to find out where the top of that handle is going to be. Sort of scoring there, and then as a glue, usually at the bottom of your slop pail from your throwing bucket, you get some really nice sort of liquid clay. So you could pour the water off, and that sludge that sits at the bottom is going to be the same clay body as what you're working with, and it's nice and wet, and this is what we call slip, and it just sits at the bottom of your bucket, and it works great for glue. So then I'm going to put some slip right on there. And because this is really wet, I could score this and stick it right on there, but I know that this is already really wet, so I'm not going to bother scoring it because I know it's going to stick really well. And I'm going to just sort of stick that right on there, take some time and really make sure that that's adhered on. Take a little bit of time here, make sure that that is good and stuck on there. And now I'm going to just be pulling the handle right off my mug. So the same action as before, sort of wetting my hand down and just letting it slide over the surface of the handle, and just really paying attention on the symmetry of the mug, that the handle is coming in the right direction off the mug. And just pulling down. Also don't want to create any hard edges or anything like that. Once I've got my shape that I'm looking for, curl that down and attach it from the bottom. So the way that I like to attach it at the bottom is I like to just sort of press it in. And because this handle is really wet, coming right out of the slop pail basically, I know that it's going to stick really well to the edge of the mug. So I really want to pay attention to this negative space here. And I want to pay attention to the way it sits on the mug. I don't want it to be cockeyed or over to one edge. And one of the things that I find really important on a coffee mug is this inside here. You don't want a sharp edge, because this is where this is the part that your fingers touch. So you want that to be a nice smooth edge in there. So really take your time to kind of refine all those little edges and get a nice handle on there. There you go, that's one handle. So that one was pulled off the mug. This one here, you can see these were the first ones that I pulled. It's kind of stuck to this surface. This is a very porous surface. So we got a handle right here. I'm going to take the thickest end of the handle. Where's my knife? Here's this. I'm going to cut that off, get a nice clean edge. Then I'm going to take this and I'm just going to use my finger and I'm just tapping that, sort of opening that edge up. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this is the part that's going to stick against the mug wall, and I want a little bit of surface area for it to stick properly. Same as before, I'm going to slip and score. So this would be scoring. A little bit of slip. Now here's that handle. Once again, really making sure that this part is well adhered. I always like to look at it and make sure that it's dead center on the mug, because it's really easy to make it go a little bit cockeyed. The excess at the bottom. that bottom right into there. Sometimes I find it really handy to have a nice smooth brush. You know, a very smooth bristle brush, and just kind of run it over the surface and smooth out any of those edges. Get rid of any fingerprints, because all that stuff shows up after the firing. It doesn't disappear. So you can see here we have the mug handle, and there's a little bit of a gap right at the bottom here. Some people don't mind that. If you want a handle that looks like it's sort of growing out of both ends, you could take a little bit of clay and just sort of insert it into that gap. And then with, you know, some kind of smoothing tool, you know, even the end of a paintbrush, it's really nice, sort of smooth. Just kind of go in there and sort of heal up that edge. Sometimes people will use one of these sort of rubber tools. These are also really handy to, you know, get at any of those little edges and stuff. And to me, it's really worth taking your time on a nice handle, because that, to me, defines a nice mug. So there's another handle. Now, depending on the mug, you know, these are fairly big mugs. I tend to make mugs the way that I like to drink coffee, so I like a decent sized cup of coffee, and that's why these mugs are this size. I've seen some people just like roll out handles. Now the difference between just like rolling out a coil and sticking it on is that as you're pulling that handle, what you're doing is you're aligning all those clay particles on the outside of the handle, and you're actually adding a lot of strength to it. So that pulled handle will be a lot stronger than a handle that is just rolled out as a coil. So that's why it's a good idea to pull handles. Pulling handles. Any questions?